The air in the arena crackled with anticipation. The Hexstar soldiers stood like shadows, their towering forms impossibly still, their black armor gleaming under the harsh lights. There was no sound, no movement. It was as if the very world held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Marshal Reyes stood at the edge of the command center, his eyes locked onto the battlefield. His jaw was tight, but his mind was clear. The Hexstar were more than just enemies. They were legends, feared across the galaxy for their brutal efficiency and unmatched combat skills. They had never been defeated in open combat, and now they were here, facing humanity in the grand arena. The Terran Union, a species once considered weak, now stood ready to challenge the galaxy's most deadly warriors. Reyes glanced at Lieutenant Hart, standing beside him. Her face was set in a mask of focus, but even she couldn't hide the slight tremor in her hands. They had fought many battles, but this was different. The Hexstar were not here to play games. They were here to end this, to show the galaxy that no one, no matter how resilient, could defy their power. "Do you think we can beat them, sir?" Hart asked quietly, her voice steady but with a thread of doubt. Reyes didn't answer immediately. He simply watched as the Hexstar moved into position, their movements slow and deliberate. "We've been underestimated since the beginning," he said finally. "We've fought our way through every enemy they've thrown at us. Why stop now?" Hart nodded, but her gaze never wavered from the Hexstar. The Terran soldiers, though still outnumbered, were ready. Sienna Vega, her rifle slung across her back, moved through the ranks of her squad with a calm, determined air. Every soldier around her was prepared, mentally, physically, and emotionally. They had trained for this moment, for this fight. There was no backing down now. Not for them, and certainly not for humanity. The Hexstar made their first move, advancing in perfect unison, their steps heavy but precise. Each one was a living weapon, honed for war, their strength unmatched. The ground seemed to shake with their approach. The Terrans responded, scattering quickly into formation. They weren't as big or as powerful, but they were faster. They had something the Hexstar didn't, a human spirit that refused to yield. Corporal Torres was the first to engage. He fired his pulse rifle with deadly accuracy, taking down one of the Hexstar's lead soldiers before diving behind cover. His squad mates followed suit, opening fire and falling back into the trenches they dug into the arena's floor. They moved like shadows, slipping in and out of the cover, always out of reach. The Hexstar, however, were relentless. They adapted quickly, their superior strength allowing them to bulldoze through obstacles in their way, their heavy artillery blasting apart any cover the humans tried to use. "Keep them moving. Don't let them settle." Vega barked over her comms, urging her team to press on. The battle was savage. The humans were skilled, agile, and relentless. But the Hexstar were on another level. Each strike from their enemies felt like a hammer smashing through stone. Every Terran soldier who fell only fueled the resolve of the others. They would fight until there was no one left to fight. The tide of the battle shifted quickly, and the Hexstar began to surround them. They moved like a wave, each unit coordinated, and each soldier taking the place of the last. But Vega had seen enough. She ducked low behind a wrecked machine, planting explosives along the periphery of the battlefield. They were outmatched, yes, but they weren't out of options. "Now," she shouted, activating the detonators. The arena erupted in a series of blinding explosions. The Hexstar, caught off guard, staggered back as the ground beneath them tore open. The human squad used the distraction to push forward, hammering at the Hexstar's weaknesses. The humans fought not just with weapons, but with desperation, with everything they had left. Vega's eyes were locked onto the enemy's general, a hulking figure standing in the back, issuing orders. She knew this was the moment. They had to take down the leader to break the Hexstar's will. Without hesitation, she sprang into action, charging through the chaos. Her heart pounded, her senses sharp as she darted between explosions and falling debris. The Hexstar general saw her coming and raised his weapon, but Vega was faster. She leaped into the air, closing the distance in a heartbeat, and with a roar, drove her knife deep into the general's chest. The arena went quiet for a heartbeat. Then, with a sudden, deafening roar, the Hexstar forces collapsed. Their will broken. The battle was over. The Terrans had won. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a heavy silence hanging over the arena. The Rothak brutes had been humiliated, routed by the Terrans in a battle no one had expected the humans to win. The audience, which had once laughed, now murmured nervously. The games were supposed to be a show of strength, but no one had prepared for the Terran soldiers' unrelenting tactics. The first match was over, and the humans had proved they weren't just survivors. They were dangerous. In the high command chamber, representatives from each empire sat with cold eyes, their faces hard with calculation. The Rothak general, Gorvok, his body still scared from the brutal fight, glared at the screen where Marshal Reyes stood with his soldiers. The Terran victory had shaken the galaxy, and a quiet, simmering anger began to grow. "This will not stand," Gorvok growled, slamming his fist on the table. "We must correct this." The other commanders nodded, their eyes flickering with uncertainty. The rules had been clear, but now something had to be done. The humans had found a way to exploit the system, and the game needed to be adjusted. The stakes had just gotten higher, and the gloves were about to come off. Back in the arena, a new announcement echoed through the massive speakers, the voice smooth, but laced with a warning tone. Due to the unexpected results of the previous match, the regulations have been altered. The Terran Union will now face modified conditions. All weapons systems are now upgraded. Soldiers may target officers directly, and additional reinforcements will be allowed. Let the games continue. The crowd stirred, murmuring in confusion. The humans' victory had been so complete, so precise, that the very rules of the competition had been adjusted on the fly. The game had tilted in favor of the other empires, but there was no turning back now. The challenge had been thrown, and the humans were being forced to play by new, harsher rules. Marshal Reyes didn't flinch. If anything, the shift only seemed to solidify his resolve. He stepped to the front of his small team of soldiers and surveyed the battlefield, his eyes calculating, focused. "We knew this was coming," he muttered to his squad. "They can change the rules, but they can't change us." A few of the soldiers nodded, understanding the gravity of what was ahead. The human strategy had been built on adaptability, on bending the rules and making them their own. But now, the stakes were being raised by a galaxy that had no idea what it had just awakened. The next match was against the Vartuk, an insectoid species known for their speed and agility. Their soldiers, swarming in massive numbers, moved like a hive, swift, organized, and deadly. As the countdown began, the Vartuk general, Synthor, stood at the edge of the field, watching with cold amusement as the human soldiers assembled in their tiny ranks. The ground trembled as the Vartuk forces rushed forward, their multi-limbed bodies moving faster than any human could track. But the humans? They were already gone. They had learned the rules of the game, and now they were going to rewrite them. The arena was no longer just a battlefield. It was a proving ground. And for the first time in a long while, the galaxy was starting to realize the humans weren't just players. They were the ones setting the rules now. The stadium was eerily quiet now, the echoes of battle still lingering in the air. The arena, once a dazzling display of lights and noise, had become a battlefield scarred by smoke and destruction. The Terran soldiers, having routed the Vartok in their most impressive victory yet, stood among the ruins of their enemies, breathing heavily but standing tall. Yet despite their triumph, there was an unsettling feeling that something much darker was brewing. Marshal Reyes paced slowly at the command center, his eyes fixed on the screen that displayed the battlefield. His soldiers were battered, but they were victorious. Another empire's elite forces had been reduced to nothing more than scattered remnants. Yet there was no sense of celebration. The game, he knew, was only going to get harder from here. The crowd in the arena had grown tense too. The excitement of the battle was gone. In its place was uncertainty. Had they underestimated the humans all along? They had thought the Terran Union was a joke, an anomaly among the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Now, humanity had left an undeniable mark on the galaxy's most brutal war games. The aliens who once mocked the Terrans were beginning to realize that this tiny army was something they could no longer dismiss. On the battlefield, Sergeant Torres scanned the horizon, his pulse rifle held low but ready. The humans' victory against the Vartok had been a display of skill and precision, but Torres wasn't fooled. They were only one battle in, and the worst was still to come. The next challenge would be their hardest yet. The Tiberian Dominion had entered the fray, the most ruthless, militarized empire in the galaxy, known for their cold, calculated strategies and their genetically enhanced super soldiers. They won't hold back, Torres muttered under his breath. Neither will we. His fingers tightened on his weapon. No one had seen what he and his comrades had seen, what humanity had survived. War was their heritage now, forged in centuries of struggle, defeat, and an unyielding will to rise again. The Terrans may have been underestimated, but now the galaxy would know they were not to be taken lightly. As the Tiberian fleet descended into the arena, the tension in the air was almost palpable. Their ships gleamed with the cold elegance of power, and their soldiers stepped onto the battlefield, a terrifying presence in their black and silver armor. Every movement they made was a display of absolute control. These were not mere soldiers. They were machines of war, bred for efficiency, and their gaze held nothing but ruthless precision. The humans, on the other hand, were scrappy. Their uniforms were patched and weathered, their equipment simple but effective. There was no grand design to their appearance, only the starkness of a people who had fought their way to this point by sheer force of will. And yet, in their eyes, there was something more, a fire that could not be extinguished. Lieutenant Hart signaled for the squad to spread out. "Stay sharp," she said, her voice calm but carrying a quiet strength. "We've fought against the odds before. Let's make sure they know who we are." The Tiberians advanced, their soldiers moving like shadows, impossibly fast. A chorus of energy blasts rang out, but the Terrans were already in motion, dodging, ducking, returning fire. It was a blur of movement, but through it all, the humans held their ground. A Tiberian soldier broke through their lines, a massive hulking figure, but he was met by Corporal Vega, her face set in a mask of focus. The Tiberian's blade came down with lightning speed, but Vega was faster. She twisted and spun, narrowly avoiding the strike, before launching herself at him with a fury that could only come from years of surviving the worst the universe could throw at them. The clash was deafening. The Tiberian was a juggernaut, but Vega's strength was in her speed, in her relentless drive to prove that no matter how many times they were knocked down, humanity would always rise. With a roar, Vega drove a combat knife straight through the Tiberian's neck. He collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud, his body twitching for a moment before going still. The crowd, silent moments before, erupted into gasps of shock. The humans had done it again. They had faced their most daunting challenge yet, and they had won. But deep down, the Terran soldiers knew this was only the beginning. The Tiberians might have fallen, but the real enemy was yet to show its face. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, and they would make the same mistake again. The arena was a wreck. Ruined ships lay scattered like fallen giants, their once pristine hulls now twisted and broken. The ground was charred and cratered, the remnants of explosions still smoking in the aftermath of one of the most brutal and fierce battles the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Hexstar, the galaxy's mightiest warriors, had been defeated, their ironclad resolve shattered by a force they had once underestimated: humanity. Marshal Reyes stood at the edge of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the aftermath. The once dreaded Hexstar Dominion was in retreat, their soldiers limping off the field, defeated and demoralized. Their proud, unyielding formation had crumbled under the relentless pressure of Terran ingenuity and sheer determination. And yet, Rice felt no triumph in his chest, only a heavy, lingering sense of responsibility. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. "Do you think they'll retreat for good, sir?" Captain Riley asked, her voice breaking the silence. She was beside him, looking at the retreating Hexstar forces. Rice turned, his face unreadable. "They'll be back," he said, his voice firm but tinged with weariness. "The galaxy's elite have underestimated us for too long, but now they know. They've seen what humanity is capable of." Across the battlefield, the Terran soldiers were beginning to regroup, checking their wounded, gathering their fallen comrades, and preparing for whatever came next. Despite the immense victory, there was no celebration, no cheers. The cost had been high, many lives had been lost, and countless others had been changed forever. But the message had been sent. Sergeant Vega walked slowly through the battlefield, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her armor was battered, streaked with dirt and blood, but she didn't care. The mission had been accomplished. They had fought tooth and nail to protect their people, their home. It had taken everything they had, sweat, blood, tears, but they had emerged victorious. And in that victory was something even more powerful than triumph: hope. For the first time, humanity was no longer the underdog. They had proven their worth to the galaxy. They were no longer seen as a tiny army, but as a force to be reckoned with. The wind picked up, rustling through the ruins of the battlefield. In the distance, new ships appeared, human ships, not from the battle, but from the Terran High Command. The reinforcements had arrived. More soldiers, more supplies, and more hope. Humanity was not done, not by a long shot. As the reinforcements touched down, Lieutenant Hart approached, a slight smile on her face despite the exhaustion that weighed on her. "We did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but the pride was unmistakable. Vega nodded, her expression fierce and unwavering. "This is just the beginning. We've shown them what we can do. Now we show them what we're really made of." Ray stepped forward, his gaze locked on the horizon. "This victory isn't just ours. It's for every person who has ever been told they were too weak, too small, too insignificant. It's for every species who has ever fought against the impossible and come out on top. Humanity is here to stay." As he spoke, the skies above the battlefield darkened. But this time, the shadows didn't feel like a threat. They felt like the beginning of something new, something humanity had fought for, bled for, and now, finally, earned. The galaxy would never be the same. The arena was a place of death and glory. Its walls, once pristine, were now stained with the remnants of battle, the burnt scorch marks of pulse weapons, the shattered remnants of once immense war machines, and the bloody traces of fallen soldiers. The Terran forces had dominated each round, defying every expectation, every attempt to break them. But now, as the dust settled and the victorious humans regrouped, there was an unsettling stillness. Marshal Reyes stood at the edge of the command center, staring down at the arena. His face was unreadable, but inside, his mind raced. They had defeated the Vartok, the Tiberians. Each battle had been a triumph, but they had also revealed something far more dangerous. The Terrans were not only playing the game, they were changing it. But now the galaxy's elite forces were on the move, the true threat looming on the horizon. The next match would be different. Captain Riley, standing beside him, spoke quietly. "They're watching, sir. The High Council. They want to know what we're really capable of." Riley's words hung in the air. The humans had risen from nothing to stand toe-to-toe with the galaxy's mightiest, but that only made them a greater threat. The next enemy wouldn't come with the usual arrogance or overconfidence. They would come with everything they had, every weapon, every advantage, every shred of military brilliance. And yet, Reyes wasn't worried. "Let them watch," he said softly. "They'll see." A harsh, mechanical sound cut through the silence as the massive doors to the arena opened. A procession of ships descended from the sky, each one blacker than the last, sleek, and adorned with dark, pulsating symbols. The Hexstar Dominion had arrived. Known for their brutal strategy and unyielding warriors, the Hexstar were the true apex predators of the galaxy. Their soldiers were more than just soldiers. They were genetically enhanced, bred for combat, designed for nothing less than annihilation. The arena's crowd grew tense, whispers filling the stands. The Hexstar were feared by all. Few had survived their campaigns, fewer still had defeated them. This was the enemy they had been waiting for, the final test. Sergeant Vega stood with her rifle slung low across her back, her eyes locked on the descending ships. Her comrades were silent around her, preparing for what was sure to be the fight of their lives. Yet Vega wasn't afraid. She had fought in wars where the odds were worse, where humanity's survival was always in question. The Terrans weren't just survivors, they were fighters. "We don't back down," Vega muttered, her voice barely audible, but the words were filled with conviction. The squad nodded. No one spoke now. The time for words had passed. The Hexstar soldiers landed, their armor sleek and dark, their movements precise and synchronized. Each one was a towering figure, their bodies honed by brutal enhancements. The Hexstar were creatures of war, and their presence alone sent a chill through the arena. But the humans stood tall, faces set with unwavering resolve. Marshal Reyes's eyes scanned the Hexstar forces. He didn't flinch. He had seen this before. Empires who thought their superiority could crush humanity. They always underestimated the human spirit. And that, above all, would be their undoing. The countdown began, and with it, the tension in the air thickened, building with each passing second. The next battle would not be like the others. This would be a test of endurance, of willpower. The Hexstar would bring everything they had, but the Terrans had something they couldn't account for: humanity's heart. As the arena's gates slid open, signaling the start of the match, the Terran soldiers moved into position with cold precision. They knew what had to be done. The rules had changed again, but there was one thing that would never change. They would fight to the very end. The crowds buzzed with anticipation as the massive station Veyron 6 floated silently against the backdrop of stars, its gleaming hull reflecting the lights of 1,000 ships. Alien warships, sleek and intimidating, docked at the station's outer rings. Thousands of species, from towering insectoids to elegant reptilian diplomats, gathered in the grand arena, their voices blending into a low, excited hum. The Galactic War Games were the highlight of the year. Every empire sent their finest warriors to showcase the strength of their civilizations, battles to prove dominance in the stars. The rules were simple. Each empire's best soldiers would compete in deadly duels, skirmishes, and challenges that would test their might, strategy, and resolve. Only one could stand at the top. A hush fell over the arena as the last of the ships arrived. This year, however, there was an unexpected entry. The screen above flickered to life, revealing a small shuttle making its way to the staging area. A murmur ran through the crowd. The shuttle was unremarkable, almost too small, too humble. Its insignia was unmistakable, though. The symbol of the Terran Union, humanity. The crowd laughed, not at the symbol, but at the spectacle of it. The humans, here. The galaxy had long laughed at Earth's primitive origins. After all, humans were barely a blip in galactic politics. Their armies were small, their technology outdated compared to the sleek ships and powerful weapons of the dominant species. The shuttle landed, its landing gear scraping the metallic surface of the arena with a noise that made the spectators wince. The air buzzed with anticipation. From the open hatch, Marshal Reyes stepped onto the platform. A wiry man with graying hair and battle-worn armor, his eyes gleamed with quiet determination. Behind him, a handful of human soldiers followed, tired faces, but all radiating an undeniable confidence. They moved in unison, the sound of their boots echoing on the hard surface. The announcer's voice, amplified throughout the station, tried to mask the thin amusement in his tone. And now, a most surprising participant. The Terran Union, with their tiny army. The crowd erupted in laughter, some alien commanders shaking their heads, others chuckling with bemusement. The humans had brought a handful of soldiers, barely a fraction of what the other empires had mustered. They were outclassed, outgunned, and outnumbered before they even stepped foot on the field. Marshal Reyes gave the crowd a brief nod, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and gestured to his soldiers. "We're here to fight, not to entertain." His voice was calm, steady, like a man who knew something the galaxy didn't, something they would soon learn. As the spectators continued to mock the tiny army, Reyes smiled. This wasn't about size. This was about will. And humans, they never quit. The match was about to begin. The atmosphere in the arena shifted. What had been a light-hearted chuckle quickly gave way to the unease of uncertainty. As the battle commenced, the massive Rothak brute hordes stomped into the arena, their heavy boots reverberating like distant thunder. 10,000 of them, clad in thick, jagged armor, each wielding massive axes and serrated blades. The Rothak were known for their brute strength, their ability to crush entire armies with sheer force. They were a terrifying sight, each one towering over the humans like monsters. The Terran soldiers, however, stood their ground. The human ranks were small, far too small to match the overwhelming force of the Rothak. But they moved with an eerie unity, their eyes locked forward, their faces set with a grim determination. The first volley of fire from the Rothak came in heavy waves. Laser bolts, pulse cannons, and explosives that would have obliterated most armies. The humans, though, didn't flinch. They scattered into the chaos like shadows, swift and purposeful. A Rothak soldier roared, swinging his massive axe down at a human soldier. The Terran soldier, Sergeant Torres, barely dodged in time, his movements lightning quick. He rolled into a crouch and fired a single precise shot. The Rothak's helmet shattered, and he crumpled to the ground. It was a moment of silence before another Rothak bellowed in fury, charging in. But Torres was already gone, darting behind cover, his face as calm as a lake on a windless morning. The alien spectators gaped in disbelief. The Rothak, proud and powerful, were being pushed back. The human tactics were strange, unorthodox, more like a game of cat and mouse than a direct confrontation. And the Terrans, they never stopped smiling. Even under fire, they showed no fear. Every shot, every movement was deliberate, calculated. One Rothak brute, larger than the others, swung his axe with enough force to cleave through a starship hull. His target was Corporal Sienna Vega, a soldier barely over 5 feet tall. She barely registered as a blip on his radar, and he laughed as he advanced, ready to crush her with a single blow. But Vega was already gone. She sprinted toward the Rothak, ducking under his massive swing with the grace of a dancer. In the same motion, she planted a knife in his exposed joint, just below his massive arm. The Rothak staggered, his roar turning to a guttural scream of pain. Before he could react, Vega twisted and drove a pulse grenade into his back. The explosion was brief but fierce. The Rothak collapsed in a heap, twitching. The crowd gasped. The laughter had stopped. The Terrans were not just surviving. They were thriving. Impossible, someone whispered from the stands. The Rothak had been the most feared species in the galaxy, known for their near invincibility in battle. Yet here they were, falling to a handful of human soldiers. Marshal Reyes stood in the command center, his eyes narrowed. From the outside, it appeared calm, even indifferent. But beneath the surface, the fire burned brightly. The humans were not here to play games. They were here to win. The match was far from over, but the first blood had been drawn. And now, The galaxy's most powerful species were beginning to realize something they had long underestimated. The Terran Union was not to be laughed at. The tide was turning, and the joke was on them. The arena was a war zone. Chaos had erupted as the Vartok swarmed, their chittering bodies moving like a living storm. Yet, in the midst of it all, there was something unsettlingly calm about the humans. They weren't panicking. They weren't retreating. They were smiling. Corporal Sienna Vega crouched low behind a jagged piece of wreckage, her breath steady, her eyes scanning the battlefield. Around her, the Vartok soldiers darted, quick as lightning, each one a blur of movement. To anyone watching, they were a force of nature, unstoppable, unrelenting. But to Vega, they were just another challenge to face. She grinned. With a single fluid motion, Vega rolled out from behind cover and sprinted forward, her boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. A Vartok soldier leaped at her, a jagged spear aimed straight for her heart. She sidestepped, her arms sweeping out to grab the spear's shaft. In one smooth motion, she twisted it from the Vartok's hand and shoved the weapon back through its chest. The creature crumpled, its limbs twitching as it fell, but Vega was already on the move again. She didn't look back. Her comms buzzed in her ear, and the voice of Lieutenant Hart crackled through. "Keep moving, Corporal. The others are already flanking them." Vega's grin only widened. "Copy that, Lieutenant. Let's put on a show." The Vartok had always been fast, but humanity had something else, something they couldn't understand. It wasn't the advanced technology, the sleek weapons, or the towering machines of war. It was a mindset, an unyielding determination that no opponent, no matter how overwhelming, could break. In the stands, the crowd fell silent again. The Vartok, once so sure of their victory, were now being torn apart piece by piece. The humans' guerrilla tactics were dizzying in their speed. Every move they made was calculated, precise. They didn't need to be faster. They just needed to outthink their enemies. Marshal Reyes watched from the command center, his arms crossed, his eyes never leaving the battlefield. His soldiers were showing the galaxy exactly what humanity was capable of. He had known this all along. What the galaxy failed to understand was that the Terrans didn't just fight to win. They fought because they couldn't imagine not fighting. It wasn't just about survival. It wasn't about weapons or technology. It was the heart of humanity that drove them. They had been knocked down, cast aside, forgotten by the universe. And now, with every battle they fought, they were reminding the galaxy what it meant to be human, what it meant to refuse defeat. Vega darted into the heart of the Vartok swarm, a blur of motion, and suddenly, a line of explosions ripped through the battlefield. The Vartok were disoriented. Vega's squad had already placed mines at the edge of the battlefield, and now the aliens were walking straight into them. The Vartok stumbled, dazed, their numbers dwindling by the second. The spectators stared in disbelief as the humans tore through the alien ranks like a storm. The Vartok, despite their speed and ferocity, were no match for the relentlessness of human willpower. A single Vartok general, Synthor, stood on the edge of the battlefield, his antennae twitching with anger and confusion. He watched his forces crumble under the humans' assault, his many eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. In the stands, a single human soldier, a barely visible speck against the war-torn arena, lifted her rifle high into the air and gave a whoop of victory. It was Sienna Vega, standing victorious, her smile wide, as the remaining Vartok scattered in retreat. It wasn't just about the weapons. It was about the unbreakable human spirit, the heart that refused to stop fighting, even when the odds seemed impossible. And that, the galaxy was starting to realize, was something no one could defeat.